Welcome everybody, it is great to see you here. So as you can see, this is a panel on diversity in esports. There's always one, at least. So really thank you so much for coming in. I'm going to let my esteemed guests introduce themselves. We'll start with Tasha at the end. Ooh.
My light is on. Okay.
There we go.
Hi everyone, I'm Tasha. I'm a product manager at Blast. And my pronouns are she, they.
Wonderful.
Hi, my name's Mitsouko. I recently joined Morgan Sports Law. We are launching very soon an esports venture that I actually can't talk too much about because it hasn't launched, so everything's under wrap, but keep an eye out. My pronouns are she, her, and I'll pass over to Oscar.
There we go. Hi guys, my name is Oscar. I am the Partnerships and Community Manager for Lionscreed, and my pronouns are he, him.
Wonderful, thank you so much guys. So I'm going to unlock my phone because that's where I've got my questions written, very professional, I know. So let's start off with a very basic question. What do you think of the current state of diversity within esports? And so the way this is going to work, I'm not going to ask specific questions, just going to throw them out there, and you can feel free to answer if you're comfortable, or you can feel free to stare at me.
I'm happy to start. Sure. So the current state of diversity in esports, I think that there are players from every race, gender, sexuality, essentially everywhere across the board. But as you get higher up in esports, let's take the League of Legends World Championships for an example. It finished just last Saturday. We had, I believe, 2, 3, maybe 4 women, all of which were only on the host desk. We didn't really see any of them that were casters. We definitely didn't see any that were, playing. A lot of the time they were kind of just on camera as and when they needed to be, and kind of being I would say overwhelmed by a team of maybe 15 plus men. That was the only thing that we saw. So at the very base, we do have people, but I think that there's a bit of a problem with actually scaling up and getting up in that leaderboard and that rank.
Hello? Oh. I know we've got a lot of business owners in the room, so the whole point of this panel really isn't just to talk about what's wrong in esports with diversity. It's about how you personally can benefit from having a more inclusive work environment. So let's throw that question out there. How do you think esports business owners, organizers, organizations can benefit from having a more inclusive work environment and a diverse staff?
So I think, oh Jesus, that's loud. I might just not use the mic if you can hear me. Right here? Okay. Closer? So I think, speaking from a business perspective, I think that efforts towards diversity have been much improved. I think probably more of the issue is around inclusivity and making sure that those efforts to include people from different backgrounds are not just something that you do in terms of hiring practices, but in terms of making sure that your company culture and your work practices reflect making sure that everyone feels included and safe once you've onboarded them. In terms of benefits and the business case for diversity, to be honest, I think people are probably bored and know by now that it's morally the right thing to do. But from a business perspective, it's actually very good for your business. From a retention standpoint, from an innovation standpoint, and just making sure that the people that you have are productive and happy, and people perform their best work when they feel safe and they feel like their contributions are valued. And when it comes, for me personally, I came from a creative background and consultancy and talent management, and a lot of the time the best work that you get is from different perspectives, and you get those different perspectives by being inclusive, having different ideas. I might have one idea, one of my colleagues might have a different idea, and valuing both of those opinions and making sure that people feel heard gives you really strong work that you can then use to propel your business forward.
Absolutely. So there are also a lot of studies online that show creating a more inclusive environment and having a more diverse staff does increase workflow, it increases creativity. If you feel like you're being valued within your company, you're more likely to produce excellent work. If you feel like maybe you don't see somebody like you at your company, you don't feel like you can relate to the people that work at the company, it makes you feel a little more isolated, so you're less likely to see more productive output. So it's definitely beneficial for not only, like Mitsouko said, just being a good person, it's also good for your business. You can benefit from it, and there's proof, it shows that you can. So what would you recommend to a company that's looking to hire more marginalised people? How do we find the audience for those open roles?
I'll take this one, I guess. So there are a lot of job sites out there for people of different marginalised backgrounds. So, and also you can advertise on different Discord servers and different communities to find people from those different communities. Because if you post on a normal job site, most of the people that are going to see it are the same kind of people. That's just how it works out usually. So that's why there's dedicated job sites for people of colour, for LGBTQ plus people. So that's really good. But I also think it's important not just to hire marginalised people, but to make them feel good in the place of work. Because if you pick up one woman and then you're a team of 40 men, pretty much, it's not going to feel great, and she's probably not going to stick around. So I think it's really important to think about, like Mitsouko said before, the culture that you have and the kind of events and activities that you run as well.
Yeah, I know that you personally, I think there was a job opening and you retweeted it and was just would love to see some more marginalised people apply for this role, because it's difficult, especially because you see a job role, you don't necessarily know what the company is like behind that. So a lot more small games companies are advertising their roles and just giving a little push to say, we have an inclusive staff, we have a diverse staff, we'd love to be more diverse. So anybody that wants to apply for the role, there are people there, which brings me to my next question. So if you were looking for a role within esports as a marginalised person, what are some red flags that make you necessarily think I don't think I'm going to apply for this one, it doesn't feel like the right place for me? What would make you think that?
I think I've got one for this. So for me, a lot of it comes down to what kind of language is in the job ad. So there's this thing called gender decoder, which you can run all of your job ads through, which tells you how masculine coded or how feminine coded a job ad is. And you don't want it to be either of those. You want it to be neutral. So words like ninja and guru and there's a lot of words basically that are really masculine coded, and someone who isn't masculine will read that and be put off by that. So you're not going to have the right people or the people that you want applying for your job because they're put off by those kind of language red flags.
I think for me, it tends to be more in the research that I do about the company. If I have a look at what they do, the language that kind of similar in terms of language, the language that they use in their comms on socials, the language that they use on their website, if they have kind of commitments towards diversity inclusion within their values, how is that reflected in the language that they use on the day-to-day? Is that reflected in the people that they have on board? I get a little bit, I think, overboard when it comes to researching people at a potential place of work. If I know that the CEO of a company is very happy to speak out about diversity and inclusion, it makes me feel a bit more kind of okay, they're saying this on the website and it's reflected in the work that they do. And I'm a very strong believer in senior leadership needing to be held accountable for upholding the values that the company says it has. Ultimately, the senior leadership team and the management team, if they're not fully behind the values that the company culture is claiming to have, there is no substantiative change or any kind of action that's going to happen there, and it's empty words. So I think making sure that the people that you might be working with are committed to these values and aren't afraid to talk about them is probably number one for me. I don't want to join somewhere where they're just saying it on the front of their website or maybe in a line or two on the job ad. I want that to be reflected in my potential colleagues.
I think for me, especially coming from a community background, a lot of it is what I actually see other companies do. So, for example, if you're looking at tournaments and events and things that a lot of people want to come to be together, if I'm looking at the production team or the players or the casters or something like that, people who are either on screen or even if they're working behind the scenes, if I can't see somebody who I can connect to, somebody who is like me, then I find it very hard to even put myself in those shoes. And yes, there are people who will try to go that extra distance, and that's really good for them, that they can actually see themselves in a place where they or somebody like them aren't there. But that isn't everybody. So, having a diverse panel and people inside of your company or the place that you work allows other people to kind of see that there are different kinds of people and there are different ways of thinking, because when everyone tries to work together after coming from different places, your differences make you less different. And I can give you an example of that as well. So as an example, in Lionscreed, we have a player who is at the moment the best in the UK for his professional, for his role, and he is actually from Tunisia, which is in Africa. So that is something that not very many people do expect, but when he does talk to his communities and when he maybe streams or goes out to kind of talk to people, people now see that there is something else which isn't very prevalent in a lot of the activations that you kind of see, but then that inspires them to kind of take a step forward and try to be better for themselves, because now they have a point of inspiration that they can actually look at, because they don't just connect with them on similar interests, but they connect with them on a more personal level.
Yeah, definitely. I think step one for me has always been, have they got to meet the team on their website with photos of everybody that works there? Step number one, because if I'm going on that site and I'm seeing not a very diverse staff, I'm starting to think maybe this isn't a company that fosters inclusion and diversity. So it's kind of one of those situations in which the more diverse you try to make your staff, the more diverse people will want to work for you. So it's about making sure that people are aware of the steps that you're taking to create a better, more inclusive environment. So here we go. So what roadblocks do you think currently exist for marginalised people that don't only want to work in esports, but they want to get involved in the community? What do you think is kind of step number one to attract more people from a diverse background into esports as a whole?
I think that when it comes to I think at the moment in the UK, the acceptance of esports, yes, there are people who are aware of it, but when you go to somebody 9 times out of 10, if you find someone on the street and say, hey, I play video games as a profession, it's very, the response that you'll get is very different compared to maybe a response that you might get in America or other places that have had esports as a part of, their actual rotation for years and years and years. So I think that the very first step is kind of going out to people who either aren't very aware of what the esports space is, or maybe have a small idea of what it is, but aren't entirely sure of everything that goes on there, and say, this is actually a viable road that you can go down, and there is success that you can find in it. Because even for me, as I was growing up, I had 3 choices. I was either supposed to be a doctor or a lawyer or something to do along those lines. And it was very difficult for me to even convince, for example, my parents, who had no idea of what gaming was at the time, well, even now, but it was, and you would always get these experiences with finding it very difficult to explain to them, because it's not something that they had growing up, but it's only once you show them what it is. So, for example, if I was to bring them to one of my performances, if I was to shoutcast, then they would say, oh my God, this is what you do. People are actually looking at this, and believe it or not, there is money in this space. So then in their eyes, it becomes a lot more acceptable. So just to wrap that ramble up short, I would say that you should go out to the people who aren't very aware of it or aren't aware of it at all, and just expose them to it to begin with. Maybe get them into something that they might enjoy playing a little bit, or maybe talking about the game, or if they really like TV, get them on production or broadcast.
Yeah, esports is definitely one of those industries that tends to be, esports because someone that works in esports. Like you said, there needs to be a little bit more visibility on what it is as a whole, because esports is very, someone, they work in esports, so what esports is. So I definitely agree in the sense that the more exposure we give to the esports industry as a whole, the more likely we are to attract more diverse communities and create more spaces like that. So how do you think esports businesses responded to movements like Me Too, Black Lives Matter, and Stop Asian Hate?
I think this one is super difficult. I think it's a great question, because I think from a business perspective, it's super difficult to address these movements in a way that feels substantial and not just superficial. And I think it is actually really hard as a business to do something and say something without either coming across like you're not doing enough, or you're doing something to just say that you've done something. I think particularly if you are, a day late with trying to do something, if you try to then do something, it just comes across like, okay, you're just doing that because you've realized you have to do something. So I actually think it's a really hard, thing to deal with. I think that making sure that you speak to employees within your company from diverse backgrounds, take on board their perspective. It doesn't matter if they are, CEO, COO, or whether they're someone that's just started in a role. You can listen to everyone and make sure that you have that feedback. You are listening to people that are actually affected by these matters, or that might have, a personal experience, or might want to share their approach to something. Take that on board, think about it, and address it. And I think I'm quite critical of, I think like the Me Too movement, it's like very emotional, I think, for a lot of people in the industry to look at those things and look at how businesses are addressing them and not feel like, okay, you're not doing enough, or why are your comms looking a complete mess, and to not feel an immediate kind of emotional reaction to it. And I think that was kind of the experience that I had with a lot of business responses. Same with Stop Asian Hate. I think from a personal perspective, I was very quick to be like, this is terrible, what are you doing, or why aren't you saying something? But I think from a business perspective, and I think from looking at it from a senior leadership perspective, it's also very, very hard to know how to deal with those things. So I think my advice is just make sure that you are in a constant kind of cycle of education. Again, particularly senior leadership, make sure that you're educating yourself. It's not a conclusive process where you can read a textbook and be done with it. Social codes are constantly changing, and you need to make sure that you're up to date. And I think one of the best ways of doing that is by communicating with everyone in your company.
And I think also something that companies can do is respect the kind of, like Mitsouko said, like it's a year-long cycle where you can keep learning and do stuff outside of like Black Lives Matter or Pride Month, for example. So last month was Black History Month. You can, within your sort of company, you can do training, you can do like awareness sessions, you can do sensitivity training, all sorts of things in that month every year. It doesn't have to just be when there's a crisis, like Black Lives Matter, for example. And during Pride Month, you can spend a bunch of time and a bunch of resources training your staff on different gender identities and like sensitivity training again. And every year you can do that, and that's your kind of contribution. So it's not just like a social post, one-off. You know that within your company you're doing a bunch to actually help the cause.
Yeah, you brought somebody in your last role at the Newell to do sensitivity training there, and I just thought that's a wonderful idea. If you don't know, hire someone that does. There's lots and lots of resources out there to give you and your staff and upper management all the information that they need to handle situations like that in the best way possible. Because there is no best way to handle that. Obviously, esports as a whole can be quite... we had our own Me Too movement. We had our own Stop Asian Hate movement. Obviously, lots of Asian esports players going over to America to play, and just the hate. There's lots and lots of people that are working within esports specifically, and there are unfortunately places that foster that kind of environment. That it needs to be from the top down. You can't expect people to instantly know. As a business owner, it's your responsibility to make sure that your staff are educated on what they need to support not only the people that work for them, but potential people that want to work for them, the communities that you have on socials. Like, there's so many resources out there if you're unsure. Because lots of business owners are guilty of being like, well, I don't want to go near that because I'm worried I'll mess up. I don't want to release a statement like supporting Black Lives Matter movements or anything like that because I'm concerned that I'm not going to do it right. There are people out there that can tell you how to do it right, support you, and make sure, like Tasha said, it's a constant thing. As esports is growing, as the communities are growing, as more and more businesses are getting involved, like, we're going to see an increase. Like, it's not going to go away overnight. It's something that we all need to work on ourselves. And like, if you want to get involved with that, like, tell your boss. Just say, listen, could we get somebody in to let us know how to deal with these situations? Is there like training that we can do? There's resources out there if you're looking, and if you want to help, if you want to make a change, then that's step one really, is to find somebody that can help you, or hire somebody that can help you, even better. So, sorry. So recently in esports news, we've been bombarded with cases of like hate raids, hostile work environments, misogynist behavior, unfair labor practice, and sometimes that's the first people hear about esports. How do you think we can shift that narrative?
Going back, I think like 5-6 years, I was doing a master's in marketing, and I decided to do my thesis specifically around esports, and more specifically kind of related to that question, around a lot of the negativity that was happening in mainstream media. And even when I spoke with my supervisor to talk a bit about esports, his first reaction was, oh yeah, super male dominated, lots of people hating on women and unsafe place and all that kind of stuff. And actually, my research, even though it's outdated now, but you can read it if you look at my Twitter, was specifically around how can we use positivity to combat that? How can we show positive examples and use that to change people's perceptions, particularly people that didn't grow up in esports, didn't decide that this is for me regardless of everything that's going on and all of the headlines that we read. And I think that something that came out of my limited research was that, to be honest, I think the gut reaction that I used to have was, yeah, sure, those are the headlines, but it's not like that. There's lots of really good stuff, or, immediately wanting to fight for the esports community and be like, okay.
It's not all bad.
Yeah, it's not all bad. Like, or have an argument with someone about it, or have a rant about how bad things were sometimes. And actually just having a conversation and looking to highlight positive things in a very open and welcoming manner is a lot more effective. I specifically, I think around the time it was when there was a BBC article about gaming disorder that a lot of people kept referencing to me, saying, oh, it's not good to get involved in esports because you'll develop an addiction to gaming, and I don't want my kids to touch gaming because I don't want them to live an unhealthy lifestyle, sit in a basement and play games all day. And I think that perception is actually very easily overcome if you just have an adult conversation about it and communicate properly. And I think people are a lot more open to it these days as well. I don't think that association is there as much. And when it comes to more controversial headlines, I think that the problems that esports face isn't necessarily just an esports problem. It's a world problem and a tech problem, and it's not something that is just restricted to esports is that weird place where all these terrible things happen. It's not that closed off, and I think treating it as more of a societal, much broader contextualized problem is a much easier way of addressing it and looking to combat those stereotypes.
So this follows on a little bit from something Tasha said earlier. So events like Pride Month, Black History Month, and their impact on the community and industry should be celebrated by all. So instead of just changing logos to have flags on social media, how do you think businesses should approach these celebrations?
Okay, so I'll go here. Like I said before, sensitivity training and awareness, and paying people who understand those topics to come to your company and say, this is what's going on. You can ask me any sort of questions that you want. So this is what I did. So the previous company I was at Newell, in Pride Month, we hired a charity to come in and do a day-long sensitivity training session on gender identities and trans identities and stuff like that. And that was a really good session because you could ask questions at any point, questions that you couldn't really normally ask a person because it's super insensitive or rude, but because you're paying for this person's time and they are there to help you, and that's why they're doing this. It was kind of like an open floor to ask any sort of kind of insensitive questions about different gender identities and stuff. And that, I think, is really valuable, a lot more valuable than just having someone come in and just talk at you and tell you what's going on with people's gender identities. Yeah.
And publicly as well on social media accounts, how do you think Pride Month, Black History Month, everything like that should be celebrated publicly? How do you think that the best way to do that is, other than, like I said, just changing logos to have flags in?
I think when these kinds of events do come up, there are some companies or some individuals, influencers, who do go out there and talk about their experiences. So I can give you an example. There is a streamer who many of us might know, Healthy Gamer. He is somebody who likes to bring on a lot of people who come from a different walk of life to himself, whether that person is, non-binary, or if that person is of a ethnic minority, and he'll bring them on even outside of these events or these days, and just have a discussion with them in front of his viewers to just talk about the difficulties that they have, or the benefits of who they are and what that kind of means to them. And so just having conversations during these days with the people, not just with the people who it concerns, but with the people who it concerns, to the people who are trying to either learn or the people that should learn, just so that we can all end up understanding on the same page. I think that is something that should be done kind of on these days. So essentially celebrating, but also making it a time to learn for everyone, because at the end of the day, Black History Month, Pride Month, these have existed for a while, but each year it's not the same event. Things do happen year on year on year, and that really should mean that each year being of a different sexuality should mean something different or new to you. There should be some sort of development, or being black or Asian. At the end of the day, these things do change. So having constant talks and constant discussions outside of these should progress us forward even beyond these days of events.
Yeah, keep learning, keep looking to learn. Try and find a place or a space in which you can get the information that you need. It's also like a great opportunity to celebrate like more marginalized members of your staff, create a more inclusive community online, make people feel welcome, because it also does look good. It's one of those things where your company will look good because of it. You will benefit because of it, like socially. But that's not why you should want to do it. You should want to do it because you want to foster the kind of inclusive environment, and you want more people to come to you, because esports is desperate for more spaces like that. That people come and they look for it, and if they can't find it, they leave, and we don't want that. We want larger communities, more events, more celebrations online. Like there's so much opportunity out there to attract an audience that don't normally get targeted. There's a whole aspect that businesses aren't really tapping into as best as they can. There's more opportunity the more people you get involved. So I'm going to pass the mic to anybody in the audience that's got any questions. So any questions? I'm going to come down. Ooh. Oh, I guess. Oh, you got a mic, have you? But I want to do it like this. Hello, have you got a question?
Yes, I do have a question.
Wonderful.
So obviously there's been a lot of talk in how to combat it from a business standpoint. How do we combat it from a fan in a community standpoint? Because the ignorance is, there's only so much education you can give people. I've had the whole women don't have a place in esports. I've had you're the reason that gaming isn't as fun anymore. I've also heard people doing the whole trans people are ruining esports. How there has to be some level of education that we can provide as well, or is it just a case of ignorance will be ignorance?
I would say that inside of a community standpoint, the community that that a company or a business or an influencer has is built by them. Therefore, the people that are in the community, at least in theory, should be the kinds of people that they are attracting. So it would even be up to the influencers to try and correct that. And in the event that that is a prevalent thing inside of that community, for example, toxicity towards women in gaming, right? You have these influencers who are seeing these kinds of things and talking about it, but at the end of the day, it's something that should also be community-led, I think. Having the communities talk to the communities as opposed to that one person talking to the people that they've kind of built. All of this should really be community-led, because at the end of the day, I'm not trying to say that we are on different levels, but they are of the same understanding, because they've all come from the same place to come into one space and listen to one focal point. So in order to correct that, I would look into making all of these kinds of talks and discussions a lot more community-led, as opposed to led by the company, as you said. Just because it's easier to listen to the people that you're a part of, as opposed to the people that you look up to, as weird as it sounds.
Yeah, I also think it's important to note that there are lots of marginalised people within esports, and it's not their job to educate you. Obviously, a lot of them do, but as a person in esports, you don't necessarily always want to be the marginalised person. You don't want people to necessarily come to you. Obviously, that's the kind of environment that we want to foster, like where it is an open discussion, but there are places where people are able they're ready. There's companies, for example, Women in Games International, who is the sponsor of this panel. They hold sessions on pay equality, on how to make sure that a company that you're applying for is open and inclusive. Like there's places that you can go if you're looking for that kind of training. Questions? Oh, sorry, over here.
Firstly, really glad the panel is here, but to extend on what you've just said, both Mitsouko and I was on a panel and we got asked as women what we are doing to bring more women into esports. So I turned around to pretty much, I think it was 100% male audience saying, well, what are you doing? And it was silence and then a rupture of applause. However, what I'm finding sometimes difficult, especially with this panel, is you also mentioned as we started, here we are in a lovely silent little things, we're talking about diversity. Why are we not starting to do a practice? So it's a question to everyone here, actually. Why are questions not about diversity strategies asked to every business that's been on that stage all day yesterday and today? One question, what are you doing? Because what I'm hearing is, we're bringing brands on board. We need to raise funding. Well, what are you doing to build culture?
This is a question for me. So, it's definitely... Yeah, definitely. So this panel's kind of my baby. I brought it on. So I started actually working at ESI in July, so I'm still relatively new to the company, and I was always really keen on getting a diversity panel in. I've only worked for a couple of months. This is my second one. I'm going to try and get them in everywhere I can. Like, I've taken it on as my own personal responsibility to... Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like, I know that we've had discussions internally about making sure that all of our panels are diverse, and it's definitely something that obviously doesn't come across excellently. But it's at the moment, it's definitely, like I said, it's something that we're really keen on working on.
I think just to kind of speak about Riley in this panel specifically, this is my first panel on diversity and inclusion. I've purposely, it sounds bad, I've avoided these because I don't want to just do panels about diversity. I think for me, I always made a conscious effort to only accept panels where it was specifically talking about points of expertise that I have, whether that's talking about esports to a room full of people that don't know about esports, talking about influencer marketing, talking about consultancy. And when Riley reached out, I asked, what's the aim? Like, is this just going to be another, tell me about your experiences as a woman in esports? How much harassment have you faced? And to be honest, I really don't care about talking about that anymore. I think the approach of what can businesses do, what is the business case for diversity is a much more interesting approach where, it can be scary for me to talk about diversity, and it can be intimidating for other people to listen to it. And I think in the case of businesses and business owners and people in senior leadership, it can be one of those things where I have to think about that, but actually I don't care beyond making sure that we have something so it looks good. So I think the approach of, why should businesses care? What is the business case? What improvements can it bring to your business, and the data behind it, which actually means that even if you don't care for moral reasons, you can care from a better your business reason. I think to a degree that at least is kind of something that's interesting, and even if it means that people aren't going to go away thinking, oh yeah, I really care about diversity and inclusion, at least it's kind of on their radar as something that they can onboard to better their business. And in kind of moving towards that shift, at least you're getting awareness of it and you're doing it and making sure that you're talking about it. And I think the approach that was taken with this panel is one that's a bit different, and one that I think is a much more interesting approach, particularly at a B2B conference, towards the topic, and one that I think kind of avoids those pitfalls of just talking about diversity for the sake of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I can just butt in as well. I think that was a really good question, by the way. And I think from my experience, I can at least say, what we're doing. So in terms of making the industry more diverse as a whole, there are people that we can bring in, because they do exist, and I think a lot of these would exist in institutions. So for example, you have esports courses popping up across the UK at the moment. So you have Roehampton University or Staffordshire University, Warwick, and more of these are coming up, not just in universities, but you've got them in BTEC provided by Pearson, and you have a lot of these young people who are very open-minded and people who are also willing to learn, but also people who are growing up in what's becoming now a more diverse community, just as kids kind of in the playground. That's how they're brought up. So I think that in order for us to progress in that kind of direction, we should start looking a lot more at the youth as well. And this this being a B2B conference, while we can talk about our own experiences inside of our own businesses, I think it's really, really important to also have businesses talk together about how they can do things together. Because at the moment, we are a panel talking about the things that we're doing to, increase diversity inside of ourselves, but what about between each other? Do you know what I mean? So this is something where, all of the businesses and all of the companies that are here today should really be trying to come together and talk about how we can bring each other up together. And I think that's the most powerful thing that grassroots does have. So I think that starting from the youth as the most open-minded kinds of people is probably going to be the best way of doing that. And I think that's what Lionscreed is trying to do as well as part of our community packs, which we have announced about a week ago. So if anyone does have any questions about it, or please, if you would also like to get involved in helping us make this become a reality, as we would all like to see, please do come talk to me after the panel. I'm here all day, and we can see how we can just make this entire thing a better place.
That's great, thank you. So I've just been informed that we're going to have to wrap it up here. Thank you so much for coming. And as Oscar said, I'll be around the event. I would love to chat. I will buy you a beer. So you can come and find me if you want to. Thanks so much, guys. Really appreciate it.